Okay, so this was a presentation which I gave at the UFO Truth Conference in September 2017, and I started to record just a few slides into the presentation on my mobile phone, so I'm going to re-record the first few slides here. A lot of the presentation was centred around this book, Where Did the Towers Go?, which people may have heard me talking about many times before, and the information in this book is very important to many topics, which includes the topic of the UFO cover-up, which was why I was talking about this at the UFO Truth Conference in September 2017. So this was a little bit of a slide about myself. I currently work part-time for the Open University, and I was born and grew up in Yorkshire in England. Had a UFO sighting when I was 10 or 11. I've always been curious about the paranormal, UFOs and all that sort of thing. I've talked about this many times. I went on to university and studied computer science and physics because I had a very strong interest in home computing at that time, and still do. And I was at university from 1983 to 1986. And then I went to work in software engineering and was there at a place called GEC Electrical Projects from 1986 to 1988, and then I was working in software development for about, on and off, for about 20 years in total, you might say. And I've also worked in teaching and education for a period of time, and I'm doing part-time work for the Open University now, but they don't know anything about me doing this work really, not particularly. I became intensively interested in the UFO topic, intensely interested, and began intensively researching back in 2003, and that's when broadband internet had started to appear in the area where I lived then and I still live now, which is in the Midlands in England. And I set up the website checktheevidence.com in 2005 and began to develop that, and that's still there today now, over 12 years later. So in this presentation really it was an updated version of the one I gave at the Exopolitics Conference in 2012, which you'll find on YouTube somewhere, and it seems that various people have taken edits of that presentation too, and so you might find sort of shortened versions of it. I think there's one that was about an hour long, possibly. I can't remember all the versions, but I think there's certainly more than one version. But much of the observations and conclusions I make are related to the events of 9/11, as I've already said, and I will, in this presentation as we go through it, and I'm going to switch to the audio that I recorded shortly, I'm going to ask a few rhetorical questions, make a correction to something that I presented a few years ago, and I'll try and give an update on the Starchild skull, which has had some troubling developments in the last couple of years basically. I will summarise the events of 9/11 for those that are not familiar with the information which I'll be including and why it's so important, and talk about that in relation to the disclosure issue in general, in terms of the UFO disclosure. I'll look at the evidence which links these events to the UFO/ET cover-up in some way, and observe how researchers ignore this evidence even when it supports their own studies and arguments. And I want to consider how this impacts the so-called disclosure process, and also try and consider the future of what people have come to call disclosure. So I asked at the conference, and I ask here, what was the purpose of conferences like this? Are the conferences just a social gathering? Do they help towards personal enlightenment? Are they for entertainment? Or is it for all of the above reasons that these conferences exist? How are these events different to those organised by, say, Amnesty International, Stop the War, and these other advocacy groups? Why do people come to these conferences? Should a platform at these conferences be given to those people who are found to be untruthful? And these are just rhetorical questions, that I asked. I have my answers to these, some of which you'll be able to, determine from what I say in this presentation, but other people might have different answers. Should those found not to be telling the truth be challenged at conferences, or should we just assume they are mistaken and that they're not really deliberately, being untruthful and clap anyway? Does the truth matter? Is an opinion more important than truth and evidence? If someone presents information later shown to be false, should that person correct the statements about the false information and apologise for putting out incorrect information?
Are intelligence agencies concerned about the effect that conferences like this have on the wider population? Do you value knowing, this is a big question, do you value knowing and speaking the truth above having a friendship? And in a community of truth seekers, this is something which has caused me quite big problems. Is it offensive to suggest that you are a truth knower, at least in relation to certain events? In other words, you know the truth, you're not seeking it anymore. Is that offensive? I've found that appears to be offensive to some people. When you say that you know the truth about certain events. I'm not saying about everything. So a few months ago I posted this on my Facebook profile, and I'll just sort of repeat it here. So this is a quiz. Who wrote this and when did they write it? So I'll read this out. Between the people and the government today lies a double standard of morality. Anything remotely scientific has become, by government definition, a matter of military security first, hence of secrecy, something which does not breed security but fear. If we see anything unusual, even in the skies, we the people must either freeze our lips like a Russian peasant at the sight of the commissar, or give our names, addresses, business connections and testimony to be screened and filtered by anonymous intelligence officers. Feared and respected by many people, these anonymous creatures can deny what we say, ridicule what we say, and sometimes, and in an increasing number of countries, jail us for what we say, especially if our timing does not match to the second their intended official pronouncements on the subject. Anybody know who wrote that and when? I'll tell you. It was from this book. Frank Scully, Behind the Flying Saucers. It's in either his introduction or his foreword. Quite near the start of the book, in other words. And that was written in 1950. Very interesting book, which I only recently read in the last year. And, you can get sort of PDFs and ebook versions online because it's so old now. I think it's out of copyright, probably out of print. And give it a read. It's an interesting book. So that was 1950, as I say. So how many is that? 67 years ago, is it? If my maths correct? But I think I found that it's far worse than Frank Scully realised. Things are far worse. Due to the importance of the evidence I will be discussing, I'm going to be clearly naming certain individuals. As I say, this is an update of what I did in 2012, and some of that information will be repeated. Because of what they have said, or because, more often actually, what they have not said and should have said. I don't intend to be nasty to them, but merely to show what seems to be happening, i.e. important things are being covered up by those who shouldn't be covering them up. And I don't think this will make me popular. Back to the WASP scenario that Gary mentioned in the introduction there. But my objective here is to tell you the truth as I know it, not believe it, as I know it. Certain things I know and can prove. So, researching and telling the truth. How does that work? Well, you evaluate and study. Key one is minimise assumptions. Anybody that's heard of this Occam's razor thing that's often bandied about, that's essentially what Occam's razor says. You should minimise assumptions. Report what you find accurately. When you find new information which indicates you made an error, correct any erroneous statements you have made as soon as possible. And here's a phrase which I picked up not too long ago. When an honest but ignorant person learns an uncomfortable truth, they either cease to be ignorant or they ceased to be honest. Now, in an article that I wrote in February-March 2016, it was called Uncommon Purpose, Agenda 22, I stated what my goal is in doing things like this, making websites and so forth, doing talks, making videos and so forth. I hope that by the 22nd century, all humans will be free and sovereign. There will be no slavery and no exploitation. All people will have access to responsible use of free energy, cheap, non-toxic health treatments, and even star travel if they wish. There will be no advantage for anyone believing a particular set of ideas, and that they will be free to believe or not believe what they like, with no penalties or restrictions. People will understand that the difference between belief and knowledge, two different things. No group will be able to influence beliefs to their own gain, and no group or individual will be controlled by any other unless they wish to be controlled. Self-determination will appear, I hope, in a way not seen on Earth before. These goals will not be reachable while we are influenced by psychopaths, liars, and ignorant people. Now, at this point I talked about making corrections, so I want to try and make a correction if this video will play. If it's not, I'll just explain it. About something I showed in 2010. Now, I came across this very interesting clip, and hopefully if it plays you'll see that it's interesting too, of a flying saucer which was filmed in, I think in, was it Texas? I can't remember exactly where it was filmed. I think it was Texas or Nevada, or possibly New Mexico. And I actually found out that this was presented in a slightly erroneous way quite recently. I only found this out a couple of months ago. A chap called Dan Benkert wrote to me and advised me of this. And also, as well, I've talked about the Apollo hoax, and it was a hoax, folks. And I made some errors in calculations on that. There was a couple of errors I made in that, and I've posted those on my website. So if I make errors, I'm quite happy for somebody to come up to me, say, Andrew, that's wrong, fix it, and I'll try and fix it, and I'll thank them for correcting me where I've been wrong. So let's have a look at this clip.
And after watching this story, I will present you the results. He recorded the object almost for 3 minutes, very close. The object affected 2 transformers in the area that were burned. They had to be changed. His cellular phone stopped working. He had physical problems with his memory. He was affected very much. You can see the black dots there. They are not there. It's the tape. The tape was affected. The energy was very, very strong. Sometimes these objects are dangerous. Dangerous because they have this energy around them.
And Mauricio Ruiz managed to fix the camera twice because the camera wanted to shut down. He was very concerned and tried to fix down and continue filming.
I believe this is one of the best videos that have ever been taken here in the US, and I can tell you, I can put my hand on fire for this video. This video is absolutely real, and the object produced magnetism. And this, I have the analysis with the logo of the University of Mexico to prove it.
So some of you might have seen that clip before, and it's a pretty extraordinary piece of film. And Jaime Maussan was pointing out that the object appeared to affect the tape, and there were various black dots that appeared on the tape, and there was some video lines that appeared from the scan lines and the tracking lines. But actually, let's just see the actual real clip. Now, as you see there, the original video is on the right, and the Jaime Maussan version is on the left. Basically what it appears happened somewhere along the line in that case, I don't know where, was the artifacts on the tape, the black dots and the tracking lines that appear, were added by somebody, or Jaime Maussan just got a bad copy of the tape. Now, Jaime Maussan himself, seems to have brought forward a lot of interesting information, but he's also been associated with a number of things that have turned out to be hoaxes. There was this recent one earlier this year with this mummified creature, which was extremely dodgy, and there was another one with what turned out to be another hoax with a monkey, which was said to be this type of cryptoid, this cryptid creature. That was about 8 to 9 years ago. So what's going on with this video? Somebody is putting in false information. So I have now become aware of that false information, and that original video didn't have those artifacts. I still think the object was real, it looked like a real object, but false information has been injected into that story to kind of try and discredit it by somebody. And when that happens, you have to make that known. I'm making that known now because I was made aware of that about 6 months or so ago. That was an example. Okay, so now I'm going to talk for just a few minutes about the Starchild skull, which I became involved with in 2004 when I met Lloyd Pye and helped him with some PowerPoint actions and activity. And while I'm on the subject of that, those that are interested in Lloyd Pye's research into possibly interference in our genetic makeup by races unknown, such as the Anunnaki or other agencies, and some of the genetic anomalies that can be found, for example, in cheetahs, big cats cheetahs, then he's a revised version of his book, Everything You Know Is Still Wrong, has just been released. And it's just available on Amazon. It exactly became available on September the 11th, an appropriate date. So anybody that wants to get hold of that can now go on to Amazon. I think it's about 13 quid or something, or 15 quid. I can't remember the exact price, but you'll find it if you go on there. And with everything in this talk, if anybody wants any information after the talk, come and see me at the table, or if you don't get a chance, because it gets quite busy, it can get a bit frantic, my website is checktheevidence.com, and you can always go onto there, click the contact page, and contact me via that if you want any further information. Okay. Yeah, so what is the Starchild skull? It's a real bone skull. It's been carbon dated twice, 900 years old, plus or minus 40 years. It's got 25 physical deformities. And I've just got a clip here, which I also played this at the Watford conference. I think I'm probably just going to play a bit of this because we might get short of time otherwise. I'll just play a little bit of this and then I'm probably going to cut it just to give you a bit of an idea about it.
How did you come into possession of the skull?
Well, a friend who got it from a friend who was the original owner of it gave it to me due to my expertise in neonatal nursing and anatomy. When I saw it and told them that this is totally out of this world, they were like, take it, don't bring it back.
If it were a hydrocephalic, this would be bulged out, okay? But only one side would be bulged out, or the back would be bulged. It wouldn't be symmetrical like that is.
So a hydrocephalic skull is asymmetrical.
It's asymmetrical.
And this skull is symmetrical.
It's completely symmetrical. If that were a hydrocephalic, the bones would not be connected. There would be no skull.
What other explanation do you have for this skull?
I don't have one. I can't find one.
People have been seeing aliens for thousands of years, but there's never been a single piece of hard evidence. Now, it's possible the Starchild skull is just that.
We are here today with Lloyd Pye, who has worked as a military intelligence specialist. He has more than 30 years studying cryptozoology. He's the primary expert on the Starchild skull, having researched it for more than a decade.
Why all this interest in it?
I believe that it stands a very good chance of being the smoking gun that everybody is looking for, the holy grail of the field of UFO alien research.
Could you walk us through the main differences between the Starchild skull and a normal human skull?
The eye sockets of a normal human are about 2 inches. Starchild's not even 1. There are no sinuses in here, no upper sinuses at all. And you turn them around, you notice that the chewing muscles that come up through here and spread out to attach your jaw and chew cover quite a wide area here. With the Starchild, it's much reduced, so we have a much smaller, much reduced lower face. And there are fibers woven through the matrix of the bone which were found under a scanning electron microscope
Does this skull have any fibers at all?
No skull of any kind of primate that we know of, or any really bone that we know of, has those kind of fibers. They seem to be unique to the Starchild. If you turn around and look on the inside and you feel in here, you feel that ridging of bone that will hold the cerebellum in place. With the Starchild, because it has such expanded brain pressing down that way at such a steep angle, we should have a spreading of the foramen magnum, but we don't. So we have a very different kind of brain in this skull, whatever it is. Now, if you stick your finger in the foramen magnum hole to simulate a neck, right, you see how the human is there, so it would be like this, but the Starchild's actually balanced like this. So it's kind of like a misshapen golf ball on a tee. It's very different from the human neck in that it's half the size and it's centered up under the head.
When you see how the neck connects to the skull, that's a closure for me. It's not a deformity. It was built that way.
Okay, that clip goes on for a while longer, and it was filmed in 2009, so it's a bit out of date. A lot more information became available about a year after that clip was filmed. The DNA of the skull was checked again, and it's very much different to human DNA. In fact, it's way different from most other species on Earth. The DNA tests that were done between 2010 and 2012 seem to show that this thing is not from around here, basically. In fact, all of the evidence that's been gathered from that skull over a period of since 1999, so that's primarily over 13, 14 years before the research slowed down, shows that it's not human. It's not even close, even though it looks superficially human. And I've got DVDs of Lloyd Pye's lecture at the back there. It's also on my YouTube channel, so you can get all the information. It's all available. So I also pointed out that when this was taken to a university guy called David Aguilar, that's at the end of that clip, he basically would not even look at the skull and decided that he would run away from it. Even though instead he was really interested in getting an alien in the laboratory. When he was given the skull and put in his hand, he ran away from it. That's on that clip as well. So what's been happening recently? Well, in April-May 2017, Melanie Young, who's actually, believe it or not, is the owner of the Starchild skull. She did an interview with Mel Fabregas, who I sort of know because I've been on his programme twice, on the so-called Veritas show, and it was to update him, Melanie updated him, on the latest developments with the Starchild skull. Now, Lloyd Pye, as you may well know, sadly passed on due to lymphoma cancer in December 2013, which was a huge loss to all of us that knew him and know the information that he was sort of bringing to us. And it was in March 2016 that Chase Kloetsky took over the investigation into the Starchild skull at her request. Now you have to realise that Melanie Young gave the skull to Lloyd Pye in 1999 and said, "Lloyd, what's this? Please, can you investigate it?" Now, I listened to the interview on Mel Fabregas' show in May 2017. There's plenty of space at the front. You can sit at the front if you want. These are just leaflets. They're not reserved, I don't think. Now, if you listen to that interview, the first hour is online. It's free. It's on the Internet Archive. I've done an article on my website. Again, if people want links, I can send you the links. And I was really shocked when I heard that interview, because having listened to that interview, it became clear to me that it was an attempt to discredit all the previous research that had been done, previous investigation. It was an attempt to wind the clock back 18 years by representing the disproved theory that the Starchild skull is that of a hydrocephalic child, which was mentioned briefly at the beginning of that clip I just showed you from the History Channel. It was designed to introduce doubt about the reputation of Lloyd Pye and or attack him. And this is after he's died. It was an interview which was designed to introduce doubt about the reputation of other Starchild project team members, and if you listen to this interview you'll see what I mean. And it was designed to focus on funding and money issues and imply that the Starchild project was or is all a money-grabbing scam. And ironically, some of the discussion of this is actually behind a paywall on Veritas. In other words, you get the first hour free, second hour is subscribers only. Now, Melanie Young lied. She openly lied to Mel Fabregas, and Fabregas encouraged her to disparage Lloyd Pye and the research that he helped to organise. This is all in the interview. So I'll just play you a little audio clip here of Melanie Young. First bit, I think, is from the clip you just heard, the History Channel, and the second one is from the interview which was given in March this year.
I'm not ruling out hydrocephaly anymore. I was at the beginning because I bought into Lloyd, but I'm not going to rule that out. Now that I've looked at it, and, you know, I think what people do, and I'm one of those, where I worked, I saw the freak hydrocephalics, okay? The ones with the big balloon heads,
yep.
You know. But, you know, and you go to Google and you Google hydrocephalics, you see the freaks at the top. But go down 2 pages, and then you're going to see children that are hydrocephalic. They look like this, okay? I can point out pictures, and I think I've got them on my website now, where this picture could explain this defect. If it were a hydrocephalic, this would be bulged out, okay? But only one side would be bulged out, or the back would be bulged. It wouldn't be symmetrical like that is.
So a hydrocephalic skull is asymmetrical.
It's asymmetrical.
And this skull is symmetrical.
It's completely symmetrical. If that were a hydrocephalic, the bones would not be connected. There would be no skull.
What other explanation do you have for this skull?
I don't have one.
Wow. So what is going on with Melanie Young? Why is she saying that Lloyd Pye tried to steal the skull from her? Listen to the interview. Why would she say that this is now a hydrocephalic child after giving Lloyd the skull and letting him take it around various universities? Why? What has happened? Something very, very strange has happened. And again, I've only been able to give you a glimpse of that. You really need to listen to the whole interview. Now, I wrote to Mel Fabregas, and sorry, I didn't write to Mel Fabregas, actually. I posted the article, and he wrote to me last week and said, why didn't you tell me about your open letter about this? And I was so shocked, I just hadn't even bothered to write to him, because he was saying that Lloyd Pye was a bad man, he wasn't going to speak ill of the dead, then speaking ill of the dead, you know, all of this stuff. And he described my article as an open letter. It's not an open letter, it's an article documenting exactly what was said, exactly where the lies were told, you know. And I said to him, so where's the corrections to my article then? Which errors have I made, you know, and what came back? Nothing. This is Mel Fabregas, the host of this so-called Veritas show, whose show I've been on twice. Again, go and read it if you're interested. Okay, so now I want to come on to other stuff. So Starchild is one area that people are not going to talk about. They hardly ever refer to it, as I said in Watford earlier this year. And this is the other one that people don't talk about, the destruction of the World Trade Center. So I'm going to very quickly go through this. I know you've heard me, you know, bang on about this millions of times already, but it is vitally important that people know that this is true. You have to take ownership of this knowledge. So here you see the World Trade Center during construction, just a couple of brief statistics, 236 exterior columns, 47 interior steel columns. Some of the most over-engineered buildings that there ever were. In approximately November 2006, Dr. Judy Wood started to become more well-known for her research into the destruction of the World Trade Center, because she was sort of starting to do a few podcasts and stuff. I came into contact with her around that time. But she'd already been studying 9/11 for about 5 years, since the day it happened. She had already determined that some type of energy phenomenon must have been at work because of the evidence she catalogued, but it could not be fully explained by any other mechanism. There's no way to explain the destruction of the towers by any other mechanism. The destructive mechanism was an energy weapon. That isn't a theory, it isn't a fact, it isn't an opinion, it's not a view, it's a fact. Right? However, you know, many times people write down, oh, it's just Judy Wood's theory. No, it isn't. And that's why we've made the film Irrefutable that was made. Adam Dwyer made that. I've got DVDs of that as well. So aspects of her research are misquoted or ignored, or researchers claim they can't understand it. I mean, what is there not to understand about saying the buildings didn't burn up, they didn't slam to the ground, they turned to dust, or they turned mostly to dust in midair, as you can see in these pictures and this video clip. You can actually see, if you zoom in, the steel beams are turning to dust as they fall through the air. That is what happened. It's what the seismic evidence shows. It's what the witnesses say who were there. It's what the aftermath shows. It's what everything shows. It's not a theory. And that's what happened. This is what was left. In the background here, just in this dust cloud, you can see the post office building on the left there, just with a little ordinary, cloud in the sky above it. Just to the right of that, half obscured by these fumes or dust or whatever it is, that's building number 7, and that was destroyed at 5:20 in the evening. So this was taken before 5:20 in the evening. Where are the buildings? Where did they go? 210-storey buildings, gone. This is the aftermath. Only buildings with the World Trade Center complex were destroyed. WTC prefix, I should say. So only the WTC buildings of the WTC complex, I should say, were destroyed. The Bankers Trust building, which you see, the black building with a 41 on it, if you can read that from the back, that was taken down afterwards, piece by piece. There's a whole other story behind that. So we know that the buildings disappeared. A couple of other just quick examples here. So this is an outline of the remaining buildings that Dr. Wood had put in her book, and I've got copies of the book at the back there if anybody hasn't yet got a copy. And we can see there were circular holes in the tops of the buildings, various elements of destruction which cannot be accounted for except by use of energy weapon. And we know also that where you see the arrow, it's not very clear on this slide, but basically 14 firefighters survived in stairwell B. And they're coming down the stairs, having gone to try and rescue people or get out of the buildings. The buildings come apart, they look up and they see blue sky, having had 110 stories of building above them, or 100 stories of building. How can that happen? The buildings disappeared before they hit the ground. Building number 4 here, you can see, that was cut in half. So you can see it's literally like it's been cut through with a Stanley knife. How does that happen? Bombs, thermite, mini nukes, collapse, pile, Osama bin Laden, terrorists? No. Seismic traces, not commensurate with the level of destruction. It's all in Dr. Wood's book. I'm not going to dwell on this, I've covered it before. Now, this was a picture that I made. I had this on the introductory slide, you may have noticed. Again, I'm not sure how clear this is for people, but if you look at this particular picture, which is before and after pictures of a parking lot, which was about a quarter of a mile, half a mile from the towers to the northwest of where the towers were, some of these cars in the parking lot, or car park as we would call it, are perfectly fine. They've got a bit of dust on them. Some of them have been completely destroyed and are even rusting. This is on the same day. These cars were not towed, as trolls on the internet tried to say that these cars were towed. Not so, not true, a lie, false information. This is a fact, not a theory. It's what happened. Bus here, before and after the destruction of World Trade Center 7. Looks like it's sort of melted away at the bottom. Again, the pictures are not so clear on the screen, unfortunately, but they're all online. Again, anybody who wants these pictures, I can send them links. Cars turned upside down. So forth. Fire truck upside down. Police car upside down. How does that happen? This is an energy phenomenon, and it's an energy phenomenon that Dr. Wood worked out what it was. It's related to something called the Hutchison effect, which some of you in the room may know has been related to UFOs. So what's the Hutchison effect? Well, it's something that was produced by John Hutchison, a Canadian researcher. He can produce these effects with between 75 watts and 1.5 kilowatts of power. jellification of metal, bending of fracture of metal, lift, levitation and disintegration, transmutation, that's one element changing into another or one metal changing into another, disappearance of samples, fusing of dissimilar materials. All in his research. Now, I'm not going to read all this out. This is one of his videos where he's producing levitation. So, how did the cars get upside down? Levitation. How did David Hansher, the New York Daily News photographer, get levitated a block? The force of gravity was being affected during the destruction of the towers. Strange fires. John has also seen these in his experiments. You've got paper that's not burned next to cars that are burning. All of these effects have been documented. I've talked about them many times. And the big one, which I've just put in my new book. Who knows about this? Parked off the coast of New York City. We've had all this hoo-ha about Hurricane Irma, Hurricane Harvey. This is Hurricane Erin, parked off the coast of New York City. It was closest to New York City, 8 o'clock in the morning on 9/11. You couldn't see it from there, but the effects were felt there with dry thunder reported at all 3 airports. This is the evidence that no one, except Richard D. Hall, me, and a couple of other people will talk about. Not a view. This is the evidence. What it means is perhaps open to a little bit of interpretation, but I think the meaning is fairly clear once you've looked at everything. Travelled in a straight line for 4 days prior to 9/11. Then it made a 135-degree turn on September the 12th, went out towards Newfoundland. Is that a coincidence? The mainstream news will tell you that a cold front was sweeping across the US and that swept it out to sea. Really? Exactly coincident with the events of 9/11? Well, you're going to have to make your own minds up about that one. That shows the extent of the storm. Again, I've covered this many times. And there was an effect on the Earth's magnetic field when the first alleged plane, quote-unquote, crashed. So, but why I wanted to go through that, for those that are not familiar, is because when we get to the technical reports about the destruction of the World Trade Center, because 2 companies are of note that helped, in other words, when they did the investigation into 9/11, the US government, there were essentially 2 investigations. One was like to do with all the failures in security and all that stuff and how the terrorists could have allegedly got through and done all these things that they did, blah, blah, blah. That was described by one author as a 571-page lie. There was another set of reports amounting to 10,000 pages, which cost the US government $16 million to produce, and they were about the destruction of the buildings. And 2 interesting contractors, there were 23 altogether, but 2 of them that were involved in the production of those reports were Science Applications International Corporation and Applied Research Associates. And they are both interesting because they do research or manufacture of directed energy weapons systems or components, among other things. Fact, not theory. Now, why I mention SAIC is that there's at least, maybe I should correct this slide, because there's one Disclosure Project witness who mentions that Science Applications International Corporation are big benefactors of the black budget. Following, and in one of their own reports, SAIC, I've got the reference for this report, says, following the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks, we responded rapidly to assist a number of customers near Ground Zero in New York City and in Washington, D.C. So I had read, I couldn't find this reference, but they were in charge of Ground Zero security from the 13th of September. They also put a communications mast up. This is Science Applications International Corporation. Another of their specialities, because they're military-industrial contractors, military-industrial complex contractors, is psychological operations. Psychological operations. And they were split in 2013 into 2 companies. SAIC stayed on one side, and then Leidos, so that's one of their other pseudonyms. So we'll come back to SAIC in a few slides. So, I now want to come on to the energy connection, because this again connects into energy, which connects into the UFO issue. What Dr. Wood found, and I was sort of on the sidelines discussing this with her back here about 10 years ago, was that there were correspondences between certain 9/11 evidence and effects that were seen during cold fusion experiments in the late 1980s by Pons and Fleischmann. And they basically found that in their cells, which are basically, it's an electrolysis experiment, which means where you put 2 electrodes into a solution, you then pass a current through the cell, and then there are chemical changes that take place in the cell. You can do this yourself, get a 9-volt battery, 2 wires, put some salt in a glass, stir it up, put the 2 electrodes, 2 metal wires, 2 rods into the... I used to use razor blades when I was a kid doing this. They make good electrodes, but they dissolve quickly. And you get hydrogen. It's a good way to make hydrogen, and then you can collect it and make it go pop. That's electrolysis. But in their experiment, it was a bit more sophisticated. They used a palladium anode, I think, and I can't remember what the cathode was. And they used lithium hydroxide with deuterated water, which is basically heavy water. And they were getting some strange effects at certain times. And one time they went into their laboratory, and there was a hole in the floor. In fact, the whole thing they'd left it for several hours or overnight, and it basically turned the whole experiment to dust. And they were a bit concerned by that. But they couldn't reproduce it reliably.
Water itself is quite a mystery.
So I'm probably not going to time to play this, but basically the 2 things in common with what was found at the World Trade Center and what was found in cold fusion experiments was transmutation, that's changing of one element into another. In cold fusion they found nickel and copper where copper shouldn't have been, and zinc coming out of their cells, and they found something called tritium, which is this form of hydrogen which is only formed where there have been nuclear reactions. It's not found in other places. They found it at about 50 times the level in the water from World Trade Center 6. Now, we again realised that this connection was very important when we came across this fellow on the screen, Stephen E. Jones, because he became a 9/11 researcher in 2005 when the NIST reports came out. And it turned out that he was working on cold fusion research in 1989, and he led a vote to try and discredit the research of Pons and Fleischmann, to say that their claims of getting anomalous energy and excess heat were unfounded. So in other words, the same guy that was doing cold fusion research was talking about thermite being used to destroy the World Trade Center in 2007.
Since Pons and Fleischmann were both well aware of the pitfalls of premature publicity, why would they bypass the accepted conventions of the peer review system and announce their discovery through the media?
I was thinking, these guys are no fools. They know what they're doing. These are good scientists.
Prior to the 1989 announcement, Stephen E. Jones, a physics professor at nearby Brigham Young University, learned of Pons and Fleischmann's work through an informant at the DOE. In a flagrant example of shameless opportunism, Jones insisted on going public quickly with his comparatively much less clear results. Disparaging the excess heat claims of Fleischmann and Pons, Jones' announcement would have effectively prevented the 2 scientists from patenting their process, a process they had developed on their own over long years of research. On the advice of university attorneys, Pons and Fleischmann, feeling their backs to the wall, reluctantly delivered their work to public scrutiny.
So you can see that Jones was involved. That video was made in year 2000, way before the events that came after. And that's from a documentary called Heavy Watergate, which I recommend you watch. So Jones came onto the 9/11 research scene in September 2005, promoting a bogus explanation for the destruction of the World Trade Center based on the use of thermite. In other words, he disagreed with the official plane crash story, but he was producing a new bogus story. The cover-up he started then has been furthered by groups like Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, which I'm going to come on to in a few minutes. It connects to what was said in the conference in Watford. This cover-up is still effective today, 12 years, in other words, 12 years after this thermite bogus explanation was put out in 2005, I regularly still see posting, oh yes, it was thermite, or yeah, it was probably thermite, or thermite and other things that destroyed the World Trade Center. No, it wasn't. We know what did it. And this brings us on again to another energy connection, because it turns out that Stephen E. Jones was friends with this other chap that some of you may have heard of, called Sterling D. Allen, who ran a site called PESWiki. And if you go onto that site, this is it's an energy. This is an energy thing. I'm talking about energy again, and this is going to connect into the UFO issue. That's where I'm going with this. The PESWiki site says, "Welcome to PESWiki, the community-built resource that focuses on alternative, clean, practical, renewable energy solutions. As of Wednesday, March 2016, there are 5,864 articles on free and renewable energy that anyone can edit." Must have been great. How long did it take to build that resource? How is it maintained? This is a prolific output. Now, I work on this fairly well, but I'm lucky if I can put together an article one a month. Sometimes it's one every 3 or 4 months. But the site is a useful resource, don't get me wrong. If you want to go to that PESWiki site, you'll find a lot of useful information on there, some really interesting stuff. And I'm not saying that at all. But what about the guy that ran it? Now, he was friends with Stephen E. Jones. In fact, what happened was with this guy, when Dr. Wood was at this conference in 2012 discussing the destruction of the World Trade Center, she actually started talking about tritium. And when she did that, this guy, Sterling Allen, was at the conference too because he was invited. I think he helped to organise it, actually. This was in the Netherlands. It's called the Breakthrough Energy Movement Conference. He came up to her and said, "Oh, you don't need to show that thermite because... you don't need to show about the tritium because you showed that yesterday." He was quite bothered that she was talking about tritium in relation to the events of 9/11. He was also given 1 hour's personal tuition by Dr. Wood during a break at the conference as to what actually happened and why this was an energy phenomenon. In a later article on his website, Sterling Allen misquoted parts of Dr. Wood's book. He used scanned images from the book without permission, and then he entitled the article Tesla Death Ray, or something like that. And he confirmed that he was friends with Stephen E. Jones. He knew Stephen E. Jones. Apparently they lived together for a period of time. And Dr. Wood had mentioned Jones's role in the cover-up as I have today, and then he said, "Oh, I'm going to go back and talk to him about this because I don't think that's true." And I've written all of this up in an article called Chilling Out About 9/11 with Sterling D. Allen. So in other words, we've connected Jones to 9/11, to energy. We've connected him to Sterling Allen, who runs this free energy-based website. But there are some murky connections here because it turns out that Sterling D. Allen is a paedophile, and he was arrested in 2016 for offences. And he was connected to... Jones is connected into the Mormon Church and so forth. Obviously can't make direct accusations, but again, if you look into this, for example, the correspondence between symbolism that's used in the Mormon Church and in the Freemasons, there's a lot of commonality there. So when we get to talking about 9/11 information, what you find out is when quoting Dr. Wood's research, it's ignored, it's misquoted, it's gotten wrong. Right? And I think this activity goes beyond a lack of knowledge, it goes beyond ego, and it goes beyond a lack of awareness. I've been working for nearly 10 years to make people aware of the truth of this. And some people do know now. But the cover-up about this remains in place. Now, I'm going to mention Richard Gage. Now, I can now prove that Richard Gage, who runs his Architects and Engineers group, is a liar. He is a liar. He bought a copy of Dr. Wood's book, yet he still claims that she ignores evidence of bombs and explosives when it's right on the index page of her book. He's claimed that. I've got audio clips of him saying it. And I have a copy of the cheque that he used, signed by him, to pay for that book. Yet he's going around and saying that this book doesn't explain the evidence he talks about. That's a lie. So who will talk about this? So look, shall we?
One additional person in Ottawa who would know is the Chief of Emergency Measures. And the reason I know is I interviewed the previous one who is now deceased. And he went to Langley, and the CIA asked him if he would like to see one of these craft. And they flew him to Area 51 and let him go inside one and observe it and make notes and all of this sort of thing. I guess presumably to be in better position to cope with it if one crashed here and he was involved in trying to do something positive about it. And but before he was allowed to go, he had to sign an oath of secrecy and not tell anybody. And during his life, he didn't tell anybody, including his wife. And an Air Force buddy phoned me, and he was dying with Lou Gehrig's disease. And at that point, he thought he should tell somebody. And so I made an appointment with him, and then my friend phoned and said, you better get in touch with him right away because he's just about on the edge. I phoned him. He gave me a full report of what he saw and the whole idea of the inside of the craft and this sort of thing, and the fact that he had been briefed in many things, but now he felt he could tell somebody, and he thought that I would be a good one to tell.
More than a decade later, the situation becomes even darker as the truth about 9/11 begins to emerge from the burial ground of a controlled press. We find that high officials in the George W. Bush administration knew of the attack weeks in advance and made no effort to prevent it. On the contrary, the evidence points to complicity when we find that not just 2, nor 3 buildings collapsed, nor 4, nor 5, nor 6, but 7. Some, if not all, had been rigged for controlled demolition. But that isn't all. A new weapon of mass destruction was used that reduced the concrete and steel to dust before it reached the ground. If you have any doubts about this, get a copy of Dr. Judy Wood's book entitled, Where Did the Towers Go? 500 pages of meticulous evidence. The unfolding story reveals the greatest mass deception in history, with the most universally negative consequences. Far more important than the long lineups for security checks at airports.
So there you see, Paul Hellyer, the most senior person, perhaps, or had the most senior position that's been involved in the disclosure movement. In that 30-odd minute talk that he gives there, which was a couple of years ago now, that is the only book he holds up and shows to the camera. Obviously, you can see many books in the background. That's the only one that he holds up. Now, he didn't quote it quite correctly, but nevertheless, that shows, I think, what should be being done. Now we're going to talk about Dr. Stephen Greer. I'm sure many of you are familiar with in this room. He will not talk about 9/11, except in relation to it being done by Muslim terrorists. He's a former ER doctor. He had a near-death experience in his teens, apparently. There is no doubt that the disclosure project that he put together was a remarkable effort and compilation of evidence. It's what drew me into re-examining the UFO issue when I found it in 2003. But in 1997, in their time working on UFO matters, Stephen Greer, Sherry Adamiak, Congressman Stephen Schiff, and I also think Colin Andrews was involved in this as well, were all diagnosed with cancer. Adamiak and Schiff died, and Greer, and I think Andrews too, were treated. Obviously, Colin Andrews is still alive, I'll mention him in a few slides' time, were successfully treated. In his disclosure book, this is Stephen Greer's disclosure book, released in 2001, he talks of witnesses that he interviewed, and he talks of one that mentioned SAIC, and I think it's mentioned a total of 5 or 6 times SAIC. Now, Greer, of course, went on, and this I thought was brilliant at the time, to found these free energy initiatives called Seize Power, and he wanted to get together inventors and investors, and produce these energy devices, get them released. Brilliant. Let's get the free energy. Let's stop all this silliness with, petrol engines and all this rubbish. And I thought that was a great idea. But then he actually did the same thing again in 2007, and he reproduced the same website as well. So in 2007, after 6 years, he produced this Aero 2012 website, which was exactly the same as the Seize Power website. But he didn't say what energy devices he got working on this. He didn't say what his successes were. He didn't say what his failures were. And then he did it again about four years later, when the Aero 2012 website went away, and he came up with serious disclosure technologies. Oh, sorry, the Orion project was first. I'm getting the order mixed up. There's been so many now. He came out with the Orion project and said he was going to raise $3 million for a research lab, not having said what he got from the other two initiatives. And then after that, he came the big push with a Sirius movie or video, and he launched Sirius disclosure technologies. And I don't think anything, I've not seen any free-handed devices come out of that I'm aware of. But interestingly, in his book, Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, he writes, he talks, I won't read the top bit of the slide because this is just him talking about global terrorism and stuff like that. He says, at a subtle level of electromagnetism, you can transmute elements and also transfer something from one place to another and infect or harm someone electronically. This is a very lethal application of a science that could be used to heal people. Unfortunately, right now, the worst elements of humanity currently possess these technologies. When people worry about these technologies being disclosed, I say forget about it. The worst elements already have them. That's what Greer said in his book, which I forget was 2010, 2009, quite a few years ago. That's in his book.
And these meetings I had with Senator Goldwater have now been confirmed by the release from the Goldwater Library in the last month, back in March, about these meetings that I had with him. Now, here's the pièce de résistance, is that after this discussion, he started asking me, he says, well, who have you been briefing on this? And I said, well, you know, I briefed President Clinton's team and his CIA director, R. James Woolsey, and I've met with the head of the head investigator for the Senate Appropriations Committee. I've met with, and I went on and on. And he says, well, what are they? I said, well, they were in the same boat you were in, Senator. This kind of secret collegium of folks running this hadn't told them a thing. And that even when the president made inquiries, they wouldn't tell him anything. And when the CIA director made inquiries, they wouldn't tell him anything because it is so secret. And so he looked at me. He says, well, who is involved in this secrecy? So I started naming some people that I had learned from very reliable sources were members of this so-called Majestic Committee. It used to be called back in the Truman and Eisenhower era. And one of them was Admiral Bobby Ray Inman. And Admiral Inman had been head of the National Security Agency, but before then had been deputy director of the CIA, but at that time had gone on to the board of directors of Science Applications International Corporation, SAIC, which is a huge government contractor that has dealt with some of this stuff. And he says, I know, so when I started naming different names, he didn't know some of them, but when I landed on Admiral Bobby Ray Inman, he says, oh, I know Bobby Ray. I've known him for years. And I said, well, Senator Goldwater, would you pick up the phone and give him a call and see if we can meet to see if we can get some cooperation on making a change and disclosing this information, bringing this science and technology out so we can get out of Mideast oil and we can make a civilization here that works and that is free.
So that's Steve Greer. He knows about SAIC. He knows that they're big benefactors in the black budget. He talked about them in that clip.
Yes, sir.
There's compelling evidence that not just the towers, but the entire World Trade Center complex was destroyed by perhaps a directed energy type of weapon, something that was operated under technology of molecular dissociation. That seems to be very much related to what we're talking about. Have you looked at that?
I have looked at it. You know, I have bigger fish to fry. 9/11 was terrible. We lost 3,000 people. It led to 2 huge wars and trillions of dollars. I will tell you this. I'm not going to get into specifics. I mentioned a gentleman named Richard Foch, third highest guy, Richard Foch at the Naval Research Labs. He was in meetings with the then Vice President of the United States, Cheney. And he said absolutely it was known about in advance and there was involvement at that level. And he told me, and I have witnesses, multiple witnesses to this, that if he were to speak of this, now he's passed away, that he, his wife, his children, and his grandchildren would all be killed. That's all I'm going to say on the 9/11 issue. But there is a lot to that story. I've never shared publicly what I just said, but the man has passed away. So it's not hard to, and I think most people get into these grand conspiracy theories. Basically, all you have to do is stand down. There's constant threat. There is terrorism out there. And you don't even have to hoax an event in that case. You just have to stand down the systems that would have intercepted it. You understand what I'm saying? So it's like when you're doing a code blue, boom, clear. You say clear before you do the electric shock. So you just clear the system, let it come in and hit. Now, what I think happened on 9/11 is more like what I just described. And I have very good reason to believe that, because someone of that integrity and rank had a front row seat and knew about it. And I've never spoken of this before right now, but I think that it's disturbing. It's enraging, but it's a minor rounding error compared to what's coming if we don't end this cartel's hegemony on the secrecy related to UFOs, ETs, what have you. 9/11 is going to be a very minor blip on the screen. So that's my warning to people. You can take it or not. But I've known what you just asked about since it happened. My whole security team lit up like you wouldn't believe when that happened. Yes, yes, ma'am.
Stephen Greer has a security team. So what is he actually saying there? Didn't mention SAIC, did he? Didn't mention that the World Trade Center turned to dust. We'll come back to him shortly. Now, William Pawlak, he was also one of Stephen Greer's witnesses.
Not give up, trying to find out who these guys are.
It's worth watching this interview if you can. It's about an hour long. And if you can watch that, it's worth watching.
Did not give up trying to find out who these guys were and who they worked for, what their agendas were. He and I had long talks now by the mid-'80s about what was really going on in government, who was controlling what concerns he had, because he had come to the realization there were a lot of things going on that weren't right. And he had supposedly made some contacts to find out more of what was going on. And he had contacted our mutual friend at CIA, another long-term contractor, been involved since World War II, in the very founding of the CIA, who got in touch with me and said, Bob's got something hot, and he's back in the country again on business, we're going to get a meeting. A few days later, Bob was on his way to work just after dropping the two boys off at a private high school, I believe, in Nairobi. He was on the way to the embassy. And he was broadsided at a stoplight at 60 miles an hour by a reinforced Land Rover. He was killed instantly. The Brit that supposedly was drunk at 7 in the morning, was taken to the hospital and immediately disappears. And all the evidence he had given in the way of documentation was proven to be phony as to who he was, and Bob was killed. And it was a hit. And it's always concerned me today that he had gotten a little too close to who had been involved with this implantable chip technology. We'd been trying to, for a couple of years then, quietly trying to find out who had been doing it without our government realizing it was going on. Because whoever it is has got total ability to penetrate anytime, anywhere, our government and locate what is going on instantly.
Who do you think they are?
Research since the early 80s on my own and with some friends indicates that we have at least 4 power groups in the world. They have wealth beyond all imagination. They have advanced technologies. They have taken over various programs, particularly black programs, within our government and probably even the Russian government and the Chinese. Their politics to them, as we know it, is not the same. And they have agendas totally unlike what we perceive our government's agendas really are. And that they are able to track unbelievably what's going on around them at a minute level. And who these people are, My friends and I have given them names, but they have no relevance to what they call themselves. We just simply call them the Four Horsemen. And that these horsemen work together at times, and they work against each other at times. There's an ongoing battle between them at a low level to who's going to be top dog in the world. The one commonality to all four appears to be an absolute desire for control of everything and everything. And that some of them have different bases for this. From the point of view of it, each of them has their own philosophy. And that core root philosophy guides them supposedly in their actions. And we believe that this is what was causing a lot of strange things to happen in Nevada that we were experiencing, and on a strange way correlates also with what happened with these implantable chip technologies that I personally brought, now I look at it, to the wrong people in the government. Because we never got to use that technologies for what we really intended it to be used for.
What do you think, these two men who came to the meeting, what credentials did they show to get in? I mean, what did they have? Were they FBI or were they?
Above and beyond that, they were NSA, NRO, that sort of credentials. But we would later check and they didn't exist. They did not exist. Yet their credentials were spotless. Even to the point where if it was an access control requirement, the identification systems that they carried passed all the access control mechanism requirements we had, be it biometric, be it fingerprint, be it eyeball, be it anything, even to access code numbers. They knew it all. They had it all. And it was better quality than actually what the agencies had, which is most enlightening. It means unlimited budgets.
He said that the people that, in other words, William Paulet was involved with these people behind some of these black programs, particularly with this implantable chip technology back in the 80s. He said that these people that he was working with, or that appeared at his meetings, they have agendas totally unlike what we perceive our government's agendas really are, and that they are able to track unbelievably what's going on around them at a minute level. And this is what I think is happening. People are being tracked at a minute level, particularly in the disclosure movement, for example. And here's another little clip from Mr. Greer, which he said quite recently, from an interview.
So the number of people who have been snuffed out doing what I'm doing is legendary.
Are you worried at all?
No.
No.
I'm not. I mean, in the 90s it was dangerous. I had 3 people on my team assassinated, including a former, a very close friend. And
what has shifted to where it doesn't feel as dangerous now as opposed to the 90s?
Well, you want the true story?
Sure.
Or, okay, the true story, that's not bullshit. There were people in the agency who really wanted us to succeed, and I was going to shut down this whole project when this happened.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, no, you have to keep going. We need someone on the outside. This has to be known. Our planet is going off the rails here, environmentally and every other way. And I'm a doctor. I'm an emergency doctor working in an ER, taking care of shootings and all that stuff. And I said, you know what? This is just getting to be too ridiculous. And they said, well, do you want executive protection? And I said, what do you mean? And they said, do you want to have us extend protection to you and your team? Now, this was after the CIA director, Bill Colby, who was going to help us bring out one of these free energy devices, and funding to bring it out to the world was found floating down the Potomac River, assassinated. And I said, well, I don't really like to play that game, and that's a very dangerous game, and it's called Wet Works. Wet Works is, wet comes from blood, and it's assassination teams. And I said, but if they're targeting my people, I said, I believe in self-defense, make it happen. So, and I won't say who this person is, still a very senior person at the science directorate of the CIA, offered this protection, and some other folks, and I said, yeah, let's do it. So, since then, we've had no problems.
So that's Stephen Greer saying that he was given protection by the CIA after he'd been working with Bill Colby, who was CIA director, who was assassinated. Have we seen any free energy devices come out from Stephen Greer? Yeah, he was given protection by the CIA because they wanted to get stuff out. Work it out, folks. John Alexander. He went to visit John Hutchison in 1983. He knows all about the Hutchison effect, all about the effects that I briefly touched earlier on.
Well, you write in your book, Reality Denied, about some experiences that were technically considered failures, but that you believe had a lot of merit to them. One of them you refer to known as the Hutchinson effect.
Yep. That was one that is really highly controversial. It began, George Hathaway and another Canadian had shown us a film of some things that looked really, really strange. We had items that were levitating, accelerating, burning. One of the problems was the range of effects.
Yeah.
So in that case, I actually paid them to recreate the situation. Mm-hmm. Which they did with John Hutchison. Who was your worst nightmare? Nice guy, but no scientific background whatsoever.
He was the inventor.
Yeah, he was the, I mean, you talk about the mad inventor, that was him. Mm-hmm. And actually, he had discovered a number of these things kind of spontaneously. He was interested in sparks. And so initially he was sitting in his room. He had all these contraptions. Yeah. One of the things he had done is look at Nikola Tesla and look at what's the pictures of his workbench, and from that try to figure out what was going on.
He would buy used equipment of various types.
Yeah. And absolutely no control over the situation or anything. What happened in the meantime is he got kicked out of his apartment because he was interfering. Remember, the television went, through the air in those days.
The neighbors were complaining.
Yeah, it was. The neighbors were not happy, shall we say?
Yeah. But the U.S. military took an interest.
Well, we did for a while. The problem was that we had agreed we would have a show and tell at a specific point. There were some things that happened that I am personally convinced happened. I had given him a number of samples, and we had them under controlled conditions. One of the most interesting, we had some small molybdenum rods. They're very strong, and I had them for the PK parties, and nobody had ever been able to bend one. And damned if when I went up there, they gave me one with a slight S-curve in it. So what happened, though, is we had the show and tell date, and I had 4 guys from INSCOM, including myself, and 2 from Los Alamos, and one of them was one of the people you've discussed before, and this is the just flat debunker, And the problem was that during the time when things were supposed to take place, nothing happened. And most unfortunate, instead of writing a report, we saw nothing happen. They wrote a scathing report and actually suggested that Tom Bearden, local U.S. guy, had slipped into the country somehow and manipulated it. It had absolutely nothing to do with it. But that was enough to kill, our particular ends. I couldn't get further funding on it. But here's one where Jack Houck and McDonnell Douglas came along and supported it. John, to this day, continues to have strange things happen.
John Hutchinson.
Yes. The problem, frankly, is control. You cannot control the effects, but they're certainly interesting.
And we'll show some pictures because from your book so that our viewers can get a feeling for...
some of the material we saw. And, for instance, they showed me had a crankshaft. Remember, he's grabbing crap literally out of the junkyard.
Yeah.
And had exposed to it. They took it to BC Hydro for testing. And the same piece of metal on one end is case hardened steel, on the other end is, soft as lead. And it just from being exposed to things. We had PVC that literally was pulverized and disappeared. Another one, they took a rat tail file, put it between 2 wooden boards, put it in there. It lit up just like, remember the old incandescent light bulbs? You have a wire across there, and just like that, it lights up. Got to the point the whole file, which is as big as my finger, just lit up, and broke apart.
Split in two.
The interesting piece was, as it had been white hot, they reached in and picked it up, and it was cold.
That was pretty risky.
Yes.
He writes books about UFOs. He's sort of he's not exactly a debunker, but he does go to these conferences occasionally. John Alexander was the head of the non-lethal weapons program for the US Army, I understand. So he knows what happened on 9/11. I can almost guarantee that. Steve Bassett, you're familiar with him from the conference earlier this year.
One of the very possible reasons why the secrecy has been so profoundly maintained is that the power of the energy systems and technology that's being worked on, as well as the anti-gravitic technology, if it gets in the wrong hands, could be a serious problem. I'd like to mention something to you may have forgotten about. Back in 1991, 92, actually slightly before 91, there were articles which I read, because I was in Washington at the time, that the military was had a problem in that they had been developing a huge range of very sophisticated weapons and were very frustrated that there wasn't a war that they could use them in. There just hadn't been one for a while. Joseph Farrell made a key point that maybe the secrecy is because these weapons, if they get in the wrong hands, could be dangerous. I would like to make the suggestion that they are already in the wrong hands.
Steve Bassett didn't talk about 9/11. He didn't talk about Dr. Wood's book, which came out in 2010, which proves that what he said is true. That's basically what I'm saying here. And in fact, in his presentation in Watford, he promoted the official hijackers story of 9/11, as those in this room will probably remember. And he was asked a question by a member of the audience.
Steve, do you believe in any way the official version of 9/11?
No, the answer is, do I believe that the investigation of 9/11, which they didn't want to do until they were forced to by the women victims, right, who put up enough of a stink that they finally did an investigation, which is an utter insult to the American people, unbelievable insult. That the investigation is not full, it's not adequate, and there's major discrepancies. We do not know the full story. What we have is 100 theories, all of which cannot be right. So essentially, one of the most important events in American history has been, again, just like so many other things, left unresolved because you don't need closure, you're just people, right? And so, as far as 9/11 is concerned, my principal focus there, and I know Richard Gage very well.
So he says he knows Richard Gage very well. He just injects that into the speech. Richard Gage, that I've shown you, is a liar. He tells lies about 9/11 and goes on 30-day European tours and gets funds of $1 million into his organisation to lie about 9/11. That's who Steve Bassett makes a point that he knows. And then we come on to this guy, another guy that he mentioned in not the previous clip, but the clip before that, the space conference, Joseph P. Farrell. I've got a whole thing about him, and I can now reveal that Joseph P. Farrell was brought in as an editor for the Where Did the Towers Go book. I discussed with Dr. Wood earlier, about a month ago, whether she wanted to reveal this information. He was brought in as an editor for the Where Did the Towers Go book, but yet he tries to muddle around what actually happened.
But now you'll see the reason why I mentioned, another reason why I mentioned Dr. Ronald Richter down in Argentina. Remember him? Because when he was talking to Juan Perón's nuclear physicist, a fellow by the name of Dr. Jose Balcero, he told Dr. Balcero that he's getting these fusion reactions out of lithium-7, and remember what he also said, he was getting them in a rotating plasma under electromagnetic stress using Lamour precession frequency, and on and on and on. And he then indicated that it was his belief he was getting these reactions because the plasma functioned as a coupling mechanism or a coupled harmonic oscillator with the cellular structure of space. So in other words, he's telling you there's something going on in plasmas beyond nuclear fusion. And he was doing all of this at temperatures far below what standard thermonuclear chemistry at the time said was possible. In other words, he was talking about cold fusion. And the modern term for it is lattice-assisted nuclear reactions. That's how far ahead of his time he was.
I'm hearing from the living room, oh my God, over and over again. And so I finally got up, put on my bathrobe, and came into the living room and said, what in the name of sense is going on? He pointed to the television screen, and I looked, and just as I looked, the North Tower of the World Trade Center was on fire. And just as I looked, the second tower was struck, the South Tower was struck. And immediately I thought, we're under attack. So I stayed up and watched the towers come down. And I began to notice two things. Number one, the meme was already being put out by the what I like to call the lamestream media. That, was there a possibility that the fires could so weaken the structures that they'd come down? And of course, I thought that's nonsense, because for one thing, you were looking at black smoke coming out of them. The fires were, in other words, they were cool fires. They weren't oxygen-rich fires. So I thought immediately, well, that's nonsense. So there's something going on here. And then the towers came down, and I deliberately made myself count. I used my hands to kind of physically count. And I thought, gee, that's near free fall speed. So this is not a conventional collapse. This is some sort of controlled demolition. And the way it looked to me, Tim, literally kind of watching the towers kind of be peeled like a banana, I thought this is not a conventional controlled demolition. There may be some sort of exotic technology at work here.
That clump of core columns from Tower 1 that seems to remain just a little bit after the rest and then turns to dust, I'm sort of expecting or suspicious that is right above where those 14 people survived, who thought they would have been crushed and looked up and saw blue sky. Here's Tower 1 coming apart, and it peels away like peeling a banana, and left with these little spires sticking up. That's about 700 feet tall. It's got to be pretty strong to be standing unsupported that tall. Here's Building 7, which is a 47-story building. It's like 650 feet tall, approximately. This has got to be over that. And here's a closer view. And then it starts to drop down and kind of faints. Here it is from a slightly different angle. It'll just faint.
A couple of other people. Edgar Mitchell. I mentioned him before. He threatened Bruce De Palma of the end-machine device. Mitchell lived near Roswell. His son suggested that Bart Sabrell be waxed when Sabrell visited Mitchell to ask him about the Apollo hoax in a sort of semi-ambush interview. He said he didn't know that SRI was doing work for the CIA. In fact, in a 2013 documentary, Mitchell admits that he worked for the CIA.
I was interested in telepathy, psychokinesis, and mental phenomenon and so forth. An American physician by the name of Andrea Puharich called me after I came back from the moon and said, I found this rather amazing Israeli young man who can do these sorts of things. Would you like to study him? And I was intrigued, and I told him, yes, bring him to the States and let's take a look. And then I set out to arrange the testing that we did with him at the Stanford Research Institute, where I met Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ. What I did not know at the time was that the work at SRI was also being funded by our CIA. and only discovered that later. As we finished our work with Uri at SRI, I was called by the head of the CIA and asked to come to Washington and brief him on what we had learned. And that head happened to be George H.W. Bush. He was head of the CIA at that point in time, and it turned out that it was all a part of the same big study. The Russians were studying it, we were studying it, the CIA was studying it, I was studying it, and so it was all a part of the so-called study of parapsychology. I didn't know at that time all work that CIA was involved in.
Edgar J. Mitchell, an Apollo mission astronaut, founded the Noetics Institute in Southern California. The Institute's charter was supposedly to develop alternative energy systems by attracting inventors from all over the country. Mitchell became extremely interested in De Palma's N machine. He made De Palma a paltry offer to buy out the invention, which De Palma naturally refused.
He said to me that if I ever tried anything on my own in California, I would get my head blown off. So I was scared to death. The CIA operates through various very innocent-looking fronts to find out what people are thinking and what they're inventing. Now, what's more innocent than a benign institute founded on transcendental principles to help New Age inventors bring free energy into the world?
CIA operates through various innocent-looking fronts to find out what people are thinking and what they're inventing. Now, what's more innocent than a benign institute founded on transcendental principles to help New Age inventors bring free energy to the world? Quantrek was another of Mitchell's initiatives that kind of didn't really go anywhere. Now, when I posted something on Facebook about Mitchell's death, saying that he did work for the CIA, Colin Andrews responded to my post saying it was repugnant, and how could I insult a wonderful human being? When I pointed out to him that Mitchell's son had suggested that Bart be shot, and that Mitchell had actually threatened Bruce De Palma, saying that if he was going to do things like this, he was going to get his head blown off. Colin Andrews didn't say to me, "Oh, thanks, Andrew, for that information. I didn't know that." He just didn't reply. You can read the thing. A couple more things. Nick Pope. If you go to his website, he actually says he's a paid spokesperson. He does product endorsement. He can suggest specific journalists who might want a campaign-related story. He worked on Channel 5, with Channel 5 on the return of the X-Files. So Nick Pope changes his story, depends on who's paying him. And he more or less admits that on his website. So, he backs the official story of 9/11 as well. I've got a clip, that's a clip that somebody recently posted on Facebook from my YouTube channel. He's had to refute the bizarre idea that the formations of crop circles were caused by the testing of space-based laser or directed energy weapons. He said that in, I think, 2004. That's on his website somewhere. And dispelled suggestions that media coverage of the issue has been stifled by the use of denoces. Why is Nick Pope talking about directed energy weapons? So when you get a talk by Nick Pope, it's not disclosure. It's not even close. It's just if you want to invite him to a conference and you want to think about what to do, just do a spoonerism of his name. Okay. So I get lambasted. For revealing some of this information, I was called a truth fascist by Henrik Palmer of Red Ice Radio. Somewhere in episode 2, what just happened with Fabregas.
This is polarizing debate so much.
So other researchers that won't talk about 9/11, Jim Mars really hasn't discussed any of this. I know he's sadly no longer with us. Kerry Cassidy, she skirts around this. Bill Ryan skirts around it. David Wilcox skirts around it. Ian R. Crane, James Corbett, Richard C. Hoagland. The list goes on and on. I've got all that evidence on my website. But if you want full disclosure, you need to be looking at this. You can't see it, but I've got just about everything on here. Consciousness, health, black world, free energy, 9/11, intelligence agencies. You've got to be looking at all these topics. Human consciousness is not restricted to the body alone. Energy and consciousness are interrelated. Weather modification and control exists, and talk of CO2 and global warming is a lie. That's the subject of my new book. Secret societies which are connected to all of this. Look at those. And I just want to finish, really, by offering some guidelines for researchers and speakers. I promise to do my best to speak and present the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me Webb. If I find out that what I previously presented turns out to be incorrect or untrue, I will endeavour to post and point out corrections when I become aware of them, and if applicable, apologise. Where it relates to my own topics of discussion or research, I agree to familiarise myself with the irrefutable evidence and state publicly the official story of 9/11 cannot be true, and further, that the WTC was in fact destroyed by an energy weapon of some kind. So, what I'm saying is that a lot of the researchers are being co-opted, and those that aren't co-opted are influenced by those that are. There are armies of trolls on the internet who, particularly in relation to 9/11, want to make so much noise that you can't hear the truth. And new cases in ufology and in relation to 9/11 with flimsy evidence are regularly promoted, distracting away from the cases with good evidence. Okay. Disingenuous speakers, presenters and researchers, one more minute, I know we've run by 2 minutes, to continue to promote speculative, false or incomplete information, thereby slowing down or even reversing any disclosure process. That's why I've got a picture of the Starchild skull on there. And they are still not able to talk about energy and 9/11 and weather control without omitting the details, so only a few of which I've had time to cover. And just as an example of where we are with disclosure, we're 53 years on from the assassination of JFK. Who's been prosecuted? Clay Shaw? Is that the only prosecution? So what about the crimes of 9/11, the crimes to do with the cover-up in ufology and all that stuff that's been kept secret? When are they going to be prosecuted, do you think? Okay, well, that's it. Thank you very much for listening. That's my website. Thanks a lot.
Big round of applause for Andrew Benson. He's defying the evidence, he will not let them draw, and he puts the evidence, and he gives you the quotes, he gives you the audio.